My name is Melanie Reeves, and if there were a contest for the most unwanted child in a decent American family, I'd confidently take first place. Not because I was a bad child, no, quite the opposite. I simply came at the wrong time, and not according to plan. My mother, Evelyn, always said that life is a strategy. Career, reputation, freedom, control. There was no room for chance in her world. Especially not for someone like me. When she found out she was pregnant, she was 44. She assumed it was hormonal imbalance, stress, anything but a baby. The doctor shattered her illusions quickly and mercilessly. We were so far along that solutions were no longer negotiable. My father, Richard, was like furniture in this story. He was always somewhere but never truly involved. He agreed, nodded, promised, and then disappeared into work, television, or exhaustion. His favorite words later became, "Mel, not now." I had an older sister, Brooke. We were almost 15 years apart. When I was born, she was already preparing to go to university and saw me as a strange error in the system. We didn't fight. We simply didn't exist for each other. I was born prematurely. Small, weak, with breathing problems. The first months of my life were spent within the hospital walls, amid the beeping of machines and the smell of antiseptic. My mother rarely showed up, always in a hurry, always irritated. My father came more often, but he looked at me as if I were a problem he didn't know how to solve. The only person who truly saw me was Aunt Laura, my father's younger sister. She had no husband or children, but she had immense patience and warm hands. She sat by my incubator, read books aloud, held my tiny finger, and whispered that I could handle it. I don't consciously remember it, but I think it was then that I first felt what it meant to be needed. When I was finally discharged, it turned out our house was too small. The solution came from my grandfather, Harold Reeves, my father's father. He lived in another state, was wealthy, and liked to solve problems with money. A month later, we moved into a new house. Big, cold, and impersonal. It had many rooms, but not a single one where I felt truly comfortable. From childhood, I learned unspoken rules. Don't make noise, don't disturb, don't ask unnecessary questions. My mother didn't like being interrupted. When she returned from work, she would first go to the bar, pour herself a glass of wine, and sigh heavily, as if my very existence required too much effort from her. "Mom," I said, "can we read together?" "Melanie, please," she replied, not looking at me. "I'm tired. Find something to do." My father promised he'd be there. But near always meant somewhere nearby, but not here. He worked late, and if he was home, he'd sit with his laptop or fall asleep in front of the TV. Nannies changed frequently. Some were kind, some were indifferent, but no one stayed late. I never really got attached to them. And I think it was for the best. They were always going to lose me anyway. Things didn't work out with Brooke. One day, when I was 7, I went into her room. She was getting ready for party, putting on makeup in front of the mirror. "Can I babysit?" I asked. She looked at me as if I were an inconvenience. "Why?" "Just together." She sighed in exasperation. "Melanie, we're not friends. Go to your room." It was a short conversation, but it put a lot into perspective. The years passed. I grew up quiet, independent, too mature for my age. I was a good student, trying not to attract attention. I felt like an unnecessary detail in my mother's perfectly structured life. Aunt Laura remained my only refuge. I spent weekends, holidays, and vacations with her. She was warm. People asked her how my day was. People listened to me. When I turned 14, my parents suddenly became animated. My mother smiled more often than usual. My father joked. The reason quickly became clear. "Brooke's getting married," my mother announced at dinner. "And she's expecting a baby." They beamed. I sat silently, picking at my food with my fork. "It'll be hard for us to pay attention to you now," she continued. "So, you'll be staying with Aunt Laura." "Temporarily." I nodded. A strange relief filled my soul. I moved in with Laura, and life seemed to change its tone. We cooked together, watched movies, and went for walks. She helped me with my studies and discussed my dreams. For the first time, I felt like part of a family. My 15th birthday was approaching. I hardly thought about it. But that morning, I woke up to the smell of pancakes and laughter. "Happy birthday," Laura said, hugging me. "You have a present." It was a phone.
New.
From Grandpa Harold. I called him and thanked him. He asked if my parents had congratulated me. I lied and said they hadn't. He offered to turn on a video call when I visited them. I went into the house that's still considered mine. I turned on the camera. The house was strangely empty. Going upstairs, I opened the door to my room and froze. My room was gone. Blue walls. A crib. Shelves full of toys. "What is this?" I whispered. My parents appeared in the hallway. "We decided," said my mother, "that this room will be for Brooke's baby." "And me?" I asked. "Your things are packed," added my father. "You're still staying with Laura." "This is my home." It was, my mother said coldly. I was still holding the phone. Grandpa had seen everything. And it was at that moment that I realized this wasn't just a mistake. This was the end. And the beginning of something completely different. I stood in the hallway of my former home, staring at the blue walls, as if I were in a foreign reality I'd accidentally stumbled into. My heart was beating so loudly that I could barely hear my own thoughts. Everything was happening too quickly, and yet dragging on painfully long, like a nightmare where you realize you're dreaming but can't wake up. "You've already gotten used to living with Laura," my mother said, her tone one of someone explaining the obvious. "Don't make a scene." Scenes. An interesting word. As if I were an actress who suddenly decided to ruin their perfect performance. "Today is my birthday," I said quietly. "Did you know?" My father winced, as if I'd said something inconvenient. "Melanie, now is not the time," he said. "We have a lot going on. The wedding, the baby, Brooke's move." I looked at them, trying to find something alive in their faces. But all I saw was irritation, impatience, fear of losing comfort. "You didn't even ask me," I said. "You just decided." "We're the parents," my mother snapped. "We decide." At that moment, something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet click, after which the world became different. Colder. I suddenly understood clearly. They don't consider me part of the family. They never have. "Then tell me straight." My voice trembled, but I didn't cry. "You want me to leave?" The silence lasted a second, but it stretched to an eternity. "Yes," my mother finally said. "It's better for everyone. Better for everyone. Except me." My father was already carrying boxes with my things. He didn't look at me, as if afraid to meet my gaze. The boxes were hastily, haphazardly packed. In one I saw my notebooks, in another my clothes, in a third old photographs. My entire life, packed without regret. "Take this," he said, placing the box by the door. "Go." "Are you seriously kicking me out?" I still couldn't believe it.
I'm 15.
"You're not a little girl," my mother replied. "And you have Laura. Be happy. Be happy." That word had no place that day. I stepped out onto the porch. The door closed behind me abruptly, decisively. Not slammed, but slammed. I stood there with the box in my hands, unsure what to do next. Neighbors passed by, some nodded, some cast curious glances. It seemed to me that everyone could see how I'd just been erased from their own lives. I sat down on the steps and cried for the first time that day. Not gracefully, not restrained. The tears flowed of their own accord, without permission. I felt like a discarded object, for which there was no place. "Melanie." A voice suddenly came from the phone. I shuddered. I'd completely forgotten about the video call. "Grandpa," I breathed out. "I saw everything," he said quietly. "And I heard everything." I felt ashamed, as if I'd exposed something deeply personal. But it was too late. "Go to Laura," he continued. "Right now. I'll come to the wedding." We'll talk. I nodded, wiped my face with my sleeve, and stood up. The boxes were heavy, but not as heavy as the feeling inside. It was heavier. The walk to Laura's house seemed endless. I walked slowly, stopping to catch my breath. Each step was like saying goodbye to a past that, as it turned out, had never been mine. Laura opened the door almost immediately. She looked at me and understood everything without words. "Oh my God." She whispered and hugged me so tightly, as if she were afraid I'd disappear. I burst into tears on her shoulder. All the words I'd held inside for years were bursting to come out, but they couldn't find form. There were only sobs and trembling. "That's it," she finally said. "You're home. No one will kick you out again." That evening, she baked a cake. She called a few of my friends. She bought candles. We sat in the kitchen, laughing, eating too many sweets. I tried to smile, but inside I still felt empty. We went to the wedding together. I didn't want to. Not at all. But Laura insisted. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." The hall was huge, decorated with flowers and lights. Music, laughter, glasses. I felt like a ghost among the living. Mom and Dad were beaming. Brooke looked happy. Neither of them looked in my direction. Until Grandpa stood up. His voice was calm, but there was a steely edge to it.
He spoke at length.
About how I'd been ignored. About how I'd been erased. About how family isn't a status, but a choice. I sat there, clutching Laura's hands, unable to believe it was happening. Mom turned pale. Dad looked down. Brooke was crying, but not for me. For herself. When Grandpa announced his decision, the room erupted in whispers. I didn't feel triumph, only a strange relief. As if someone had finally said out loud what I'd always known. We left before it was over. It was cool outside, and I took a deep breath of the night air. "Is this the end?" I asked.
No, Laura replied.
"It's the beginning." I didn't fully understand what she meant then, but I already sensed things would be difficult ahead. There would be phone calls, tears, accusations. But there would be freedom and choice and a chance to build my life without the people who considered me a mistake. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. The morning after the wedding came too abruptly, as if the night had simply been turned off, leaving me no time to recover. I woke up on the couch in Laura's living room, covered with a blanket, and the first thing I felt was heaviness. Not in my body, but somewhere deep inside, as if all the events of the previous day had settled on my chest and weren't going to go away. For a few seconds, I lay staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out where I was and why I felt so anxious. Then everything came back at once. The wedding, my grandfather's voice, my parents' faces, the boxes by the door, the blue walls in the room that was no longer mine. I sat up abruptly, my heart pounding. In the kitchen, someone was quietly rattling dishes. Laura. The smell of coffee and toast filled the house, and it strangely calmed me a little. The ordinary morning sounds felt like an anchor, a reminder that life goes on. "You don't have to get up early today," Laura said, noticing me. "You can sleep in a little longer." "I'm still not going to sleep," I replied and sat down at the table. She looked at me carefully, but said nothing. Laura had a knack for silence, making it seem supportive rather than awkward. We ate breakfast in near silence until a sharp knock on the door shattered the morning. I jumped so hard, I almost dropped my mug. Laura frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone," she said, and went to open the door. I knew who they were even before I saw them. Some things you feel in your bones. My parents were standing at the threshold. My mother looked different. Not the confident woman with perfect posture I was used to, but rather tense, even confused. My father shifted from foot to foot, clenching his hands as if he didn't know what to do with them. "Melanie," my mother began, her voice unexpectedly soft. "We need to talk." I felt a wave rise inside me. Not tears, no, but anger. Pure, cold anger. "We have nothing to talk about," I said, not rising from my chair. Please, my father interjected. Let's not get emotional. We're family. Family. The word struck a chord again. You said yourself yesterday that you don't need me, I replied. What changed overnight? My mother hesitated for a moment, then took a step forward. We got carried away, she said. It all happened too quickly. The wedding, Grandpa, those scenes. We didn't mean for it to turn out this way. You wanted me to leave, I reminded her. And that's what you got. My father sighed heavily. Mel, you have to understand, Grandpa was too harsh. His words can have consequences. We can all get hurt. That's it.
Not me.
Not my feelings. Consequences. You're worried about money, I said quietly. My mother's head snapped up. That's not fair.
No, ikuntet.
It's fair. There was a pause. Laura stood next to me, like a wall, behind which I felt safe. We want you to come home, my mother finally said. Everything will be different. We'll try. I laughed. The laughter escaped me unexpectedly, nervously. Try. I repeated. Like 15 years ago? My father took a step toward me, but Laura stepped between us. Enough, she said firmly. You won't pressure her. My mother pressed her lips together. This is our family business.
No, Laura replied.
It's the case of the child you threw out into the street. For the first time, I saw my mother look away. Melanie, she said again more quietly. You don't want to break up the family, do you? I stood up. My legs were shaking, but my voice was surprisingly calm. There was no family, I said. There was a place where I lived, and it's gone. I walked to the door and opened it. Go away. They didn't leave right away. They stood there looking at me as if hoping I'd change my mind. But I didn't move. And finally, they left. I closed the door and leaned my back against it. My heart was pounding, but inside I felt a strange sensation, as if I'd defended myself for the first time. You're a good girl, Laura said. I nodded, but the tears still started flowing. It didn't end there. The calls started that evening. Messages. Letters. My mother wrote that she missed me. My father said he was worried. Brooke sent a long message about how I'd ruined her day and how Grandpa was unfair. I didn't answer. A few days later, they came again. And again. One day, I saw them from the window, arguing with Laura on the porch. My mother was crying. My father was raising his voice. She's our daughter, he shouted. You have no right. Something inside me finally snapped. I left the room, went to the door, and opened it. Enough, I said loudly. I'm not a thing. Not an asset. Not a way to get my inheritance back. They fell silent. I want Laura to be my guardian, I continued. Officially. My mother turned pale. You can't. I can, I interrupted. And I will. That day, we called the lawyer. The process was more complicated than I thought. Paperwork, questions, meetings. My parents tried to appear caring. They smiled, said the right things. But I had something they didn't. The truth. The video. The recording of my birthday. Their words. Their faces. The courtroom was quiet as the judge watched the recording. I couldn't bring myself to look up, but I felt the tension thicken in the air. When the video ended, the judge was silent for a long time. This is one of the most severe cases of emotional neglect I've seen, she said finally. The decision was made quickly. When we left the courthouse, I took a deep breath for the first time in a long time. The air seemed cleaner. That's it, Laura said, hugging me. Now it's all over. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew one thing. The past no longer had power over me. And if it came knocking at the door again, I already knew how to respond. After the trial, a strange, unfamiliar silence fell. Not the anxious one I'd grown accustomed to over the years of living with my parents, when silence meant irritation or a hidden reproach, but a different kind, even, almost gentle. As if the world had, for a second, stopped demanding that I be convenient. The first few days, I walked around as if in a dream. I'd wake up, do my homework, help Laura around the house, but it all happened as if in slow motion. I constantly caught myself waiting for a call, for shouting, for accusations, for someone to tell me at any moment that it was all a mistake and that I would be sent back like a poorly packaged item. But nothing happened. My parents disappeared. No calls, no messages. Brooke also fell silent. And there was more truth in that silence than in anything they'd said before. Laura tried not to push me. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't have heart-to-heart talks unless I was ready. She was simply there. Sometimes that was enough. I returned to school. My classmates knew I had family problems, but no one delved into the details. The teachers looked at me with sympathy, but without pity. I suddenly realized that I found it easier to be among strangers than among those who called themselves family. One evening, Laura said, "Grandpa wants us to come visit him. He's in town for a couple of days." My stomach sank at those words. "Why?" I asked. "I think he wants to talk."
Calmly.
Without shouting or making a scene. I nodded. We barely spoke after the wedding. He called a couple of times, asking how I was, but the conversations were short. I felt gratitude towards him, but also fear. His actions had upended so much. We met in his temporary office. A spacious room, large windows, the smell of paper and coffee. He looked just as collected, but when he saw me, his smile was truly warm. "You've grown up," he said, hugging me. "And stronger than you think." We sat down. Laura was next to me. I felt small, even though I knew I was the center of this conversation. "I want you to know," my grandfather began, "I didn't do what I did out of revenge. And not out of emotion."
He paused.
I'd been closing my eyes for too long. I looked at him in surprise. "I knew you weren't happy there," he continued. "But I convinced myself it wasn't my business. That my parents would sort it out. I was wrong. And now I want to fix it." He told me he'd finalized the changes to his will after the wedding. Everything was official, legally flawless.
No loopholes.
He spoke calmly, almost matter-of-factly, but I sensed the weight of a long-standing, final decision. "It's not a reward," he said, as if guessing my thoughts. "And not compensation. It's a responsibility. And a choice. I want you and Laura to be able to live peacefully, without pressure." I didn't know what to say. Money had never been something real to me. It existed somewhere else, in my parents' lives, their arguments, their ambitions. But not in mine. "I don't want it to be because of me." I began, but he stopped me with a gesture. "It's not because of you. It's because of them." We left the office in silence. In the car, Laura said, "You don't have to prove anything. Not to him. Not to anyone." I nodded. But inside, it was still heavy. A couple of days later, Brooke showed up again. This time, she didn't text, she walked in. I saw her car outside the house and immediately knew the conversation would be unpleasant. She looked tired. The pregnancy was already noticeable, her face tense, her gaze piercing. "We need to talk," she said as soon as I opened the door. "If you're talking about money again," I replied, "then don't." "Of course it's about money," she flared. "Do you think I'm going to pretend nothing's happening?" We sat in the living room. Laura went into the kitchen, but I knew she was nearby. "You've always been a problem," Brooke said without preamble. "And now, because of you, everything is falling apart for us." I looked at her and suddenly realized she truly believed it. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "I simply existed. And that was enough to make you hate me." "Don't shift responsibility," she said sharply. "You could have kept quiet. You could have avoided making such a big deal out of the wedding." "Grandpa did it," I reminded her. "And he did it because he saw the truth." Brooke clenched her fists. "You've always been good at looking like a victim." I took a deep breath. "You've always been good at turning away." She stood up abruptly, the chair creaking. "Don't think this is the end," she snapped. "We'll fight on." When the door closed behind her, I felt not fear, but fatigue. Endless, dragging. That evening, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I lay there and thought about how strange life works, how easily some people abandon you, and how unexpectedly others become your support. I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew there was no turning back. And perhaps for the first time, that didn't scare me. I started making plans. School, college, the future. Not because I needed to prove anything to anyone, but because I wanted to. Because I could finally choose. And in that choice lay more power than in any inheritance. Time began to feel different after all that had happened. It no longer pressed, urged, or reminded me every minute that I owed someone something. The days passed calmly, almost mundanely, and in this ordinariness there was more healing than in any grandiose words or court decisions. I gradually got used to the idea that I now truly had a home. Not a place where I was tolerated, but a space where I could be myself. Laura's house filled with my things, not boxes, but living details, books on the shelves, photographs on the refrigerator, notebooks on the desk. I stopped flinching at every phone call and stopped expecting to be rejected again around the corner. School became an anchor for me. I studied with a zeal I didn't expect. Not out of fear, not out of a desire to prove my worth to someone, but because for the first time I saw meaning in the future. The teachers noticed this, and one day the school counselor suggested I consider colleges outside our city. This thought used to seem unrealistic, almost forbidden. Now it's possible. Laura helped me prepare for exams, look for programs, read reviews. We'd sit at the kitchen table in the evenings, drinking tea, and discussing what I wanted to be. And every time she asked, "What do you want?" something inside me would freeze. I'd never been asked that question seriously before. Grandfather called regularly. He didn't control me, didn't pressure me, just took an interest in my life. Sometimes he'd tell me stories from his youth, sometimes ask how my day had gone. It was as if he was trying to make up for something he'd missed, but he did it carefully, respecting my boundaries. My parents never showed up again. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for it, not out of hope, but out of habit. But the silence remained. And over time, I realized that was also an answer. One day, toward the end of the school year, I received a letter. A real one on paper. The handwriting was familiar.
Brooke.
I hesitated for a long time before opening it. I held the envelope in my hands as if it might burn me. Inside was a short letter.
No apologies. No confessions.
She wrote that they were having a hard time, that Grandpa wasn't in touch, that they hadn't understood everything correctly. At the end was the phrase, "I still think you should have done something differently." I folded the letter back up and put it in the drawer. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to reply. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't see the point. I no longer wanted to participate in this endless cycle of accusations. Laura noticed my mood but didn't ask any questions. Instead, she suggested we go out of town for the weekend. We strolled along quiet paths, chatted about trivial things, laughed. And at some point, I caught myself feeling light. A real light. By summer, the first exam results came in. They were good. Even better than I expected. I received several offers from colleges, and one of them was exactly the one I dreamed of. Not the most prestigious, not the most expensive, but the one where I saw myself. When I told Laura this, she burst into tears. Not from pride, but from happiness.
You deserve it, she said.
Not because you're owed anything, but because you've been through it all and haven't broken down. The day we sent off the documents, I sat on the porch for a long time. The sun was setting, the air was warm. I thought about that girl who once sat on another porch with boxes, unsure of where to go next. I wanted to hug her and tell her that everything would be different, that she would survive, that she would find her place. I didn't become perfect. I didn't become strong immediately and forever. Sometimes I still hurt. Sometimes I was angry. Sometimes I missed what I never had. But now I knew. That didn't make me weak. My family turned out to be not the one I was born into, but the one I found. And perhaps the one I would yet create. That evening, my grandfather sent me a message. "I'm proud of you."
And that was enough.
I closed my eyes and allowed myself to simply be, without looking back, without fear. This was my life. And for the first time, it was truly mine.